Wow, that's fancy, isn't it? So, today's session is about jamming, and this might carry on for a while actually, because there's so much stuff that we can cover within this. This has come from a handful of different requests of things to learn. One request very specifically being how to jam, but also things around like how to form a melody even, and questions around rhythm and just sort of joining in with rhythm playing. And also, as we're all starting to sort of, well, in the UK anyway, I'm not sure what it's like in the States, Julie, but you know, we're all starting to sort of have human contact and be able to sort of, you know, play guitar together and stuff. So it seems perfectly apt as well. So there's gonna be some theory bits and bobs. There's going to be, you know, nice chord sequences, nice scales, nice shapes, the usual stuff that you'll be able to take away. So if you're not interested in that at all, you're still going to be able to take away a whole load of stuff. Probably going to have to get a little bit philosophical as well, because quite a lot of this stuff comes down to confidence as well. And I really want everyone to go away with some increased confidence. Now, if you're a confident jammer already, hopefully there's something here for you, even just the playing along, of course, and jamming, because we'll be doing a lot of that. But hopefully there'll be something about perspectives in here as well, because as I said, we're going to get a little bit philosophical too. So, without further ado, as I just let a couple more people in, I shall show you what I've got written down to give you a little bit of a heads up. So here we go. Ta-da. So here is what we've got as a chord sequence to start us off. Okay, now as usual, we're going to sort of work around one sequence for a while, so that the super beginner guitarists are all really strongly rooted with something to play. And also it just gives us a reference point to keep coming back to, and we're going to be playing this sequence that you can see in front of you here. Now it's in 3/4, which is something that we don't do particularly often. We've done 7/8, 5/8, all kinds of crazy things like that, but we're doing 3/4, which is, you know, weirdly familiar. And we're using two chords. We're using a C chord. Just move me laptop there a little bit. We got a C chord, nice and familiar to everyone, but then we've got what kind of comes out on Guitar Pro as a C major 9, but I don't really see it as that at all. I would see it more as it's ultimately a G chord, but you're just leaving that first finger where it was with the C. Okay, so we've got a C chord, which is third finger, 3rd fret A string, second finger, 2nd fret D string, first finger, 1st fret B string, and then our next chord is, we'll refer to it as G for now, okay, is leaving your first finger where it is and bringing up 3 and 2 up to the E and A. Okay. Okay. So it's going to have a real folky kind of vibe to it actually today, for some reasons that hopefully will become clear in a bit. So it's just those two chords to get your head around, okay? They're really quite lovely. And the rhythm here is, as I say, fitting within a 3/4 time signature. So for those that you don't know, that means there's 3 beats in the bar. So we count 1, 2, 3, okay? And we're playing a crotchet, and then 2 quavers, and then a crotchet, which means we strum down, down, up, down. Okay, now that first down is super strong. Okay, you can kind of get that feel already. You've heard it in 1,000,001 songs. So what's happening is we're strumming down, down, up, down. And we're doing 2 bars of C, going to our G or our C major 9 or whatever we want to call it, doing the same thing. Back to the C. Okay, really great if every single person, whatever level, can get nice and comfortable with that. For some of you, this might be the first time playing in 3/4, or maybe you're not particularly familiar with it. There's a real particular feel that comes with 3/4. Okay, we often get sort of called a waltz. Okay, it's not actually correct to that all 3/4s are a waltz, but it really does have usually some kind of feel to it that's quite particular. All right, so don't fight it, just go with it and swing it quite nicely. Right, I'm going to play it just a few times round, and hopefully you guys can all join in. Hopefully you can all hear me all right as well. I haven't done that usual sort of little check yet. Great, okay. So I'm just going to play it a few times round, and just so that everyone can get really familiar, and then we'll get stuck in. So 1, 2, 3, 2. Fantastic, good. Okay, so hopefully everyone's quite confident in playing that. Now, at this point, it would be really nice if we can start getting a little bit philosophical, okay? And for you to start noticing the kind of the melody within the chord sequence, all right? That G wants you to go back to the C, doesn't it? It's kind of whispering in your ear to do something. That might sound slightly ridiculous, but it really, really is. If you didn't go back to that C at this point, it would feel really weird. Yeah, it wants you to go there. And it feels good when it goes back, doesn't it? Now, when I say it wants you to do something, I really, really mean it, okay? And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about in this session is about what the chords tell us to do, because they literally tell us what to do. They're like the voices in our head, or the voices in my head anyway. They tell us what to do, okay? So we're going to play it around again, just a few more times. Now, hopefully, you're going to be now at a point that you're almost frustrated by playing something so simple. That's wonderful, because if you're at a point of being really, really comfortable rather than a point at the edge of your ability, you're going to be able to really internalize and get the idea of what I'm talking about. So play through and really just notice what's going on, okay? Notice that when you go to that G, it wants you to go to that C. Let that come out in your strumming. Start emphasizing the change back to that C, or emphasizing the first beat at the bar, or making it stronger towards the end of the phrase. Just pay attention to what the chords are playing and telling you to do. Okay, so here we go around again. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Wonderful. Fantastic. Okay. Hopefully all of you are super comfortable with playing that chord sequence, and hopefully all of you could really feel the change between the chords and kind of feel the journey that it tries to take you on, okay? So, applying this to the idea of jamming, all right? Now, there's 1,000,001 different sort of jamming situations, and I'm going to try and maybe bring as many of those in as possible. But really, we could be in a situation where we're following a song that's very specific, or we could be in a situation where someone's just playing some chords and you're going to play along with that. We could be in a situation where you've got something quite specific to play, but really that's kind of not jamming, if you like, all right? Jamming would be more where whatever you're working with, you're having to use some kind of level of creativity to work on that. Okay, now we're going to look at several different approaches, all right, of how to play and accompany someone within that. But all of them are all going to come back to following the chords in some way and following the kind of the journey that the chords go on. Now, there's so many different language sort of barriers that come into this, okay, that can really knock our confidence. So theoretical ideas using scales and using keys and things like that. So please remember that there's not a particular right way of doing these things. They're almost like different musical cultures, if you like. And you have to find your own way of doing that. And I'm just going to sort of impart some different ways to access that. So the first thing that I would suggest as a way to jam and work with someone would be to work with the chords that that person is playing with, okay? So no theoretical knowledge needed or used whatsoever, okay? We don't have to talk about scales, we don't have to talk about a key or even letters and notes, all right? We can just take what the person is playing and we can then make that into our own. So, for example, in a nice little example that I've created underneath for us is simply all the notes that appear in the two chords, okay? So, tabbed out here where it says notes from the chords, we simply have okay, those are all the notes in the chord. So that doesn't quite sound like a scale, but actually we've pretty much got enough to play some really nice sounding and beautiful melodies, or at least a nice little tasty bass line. We could even start gluing them together and make some harmonies, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. But ultimately, the idea is that you don't have to have any prior knowledge at all. So you could walk into any kind of situation where you're playing with someone and they give you the chord sequence. Again, it could be from a famous song or it could be something they've just written. And you simply take those chords, but instead of just playing exactly the same as that person, you're going to make it your own very, very slightly. So, what we're going to do with these notes? Well, first of all, we're not going to use all of them at all because that's just too much. Let's keep things nice and simple. So let's maybe take up to about here. I think that would be quite nice. Okay, if you just play those as a little bit of a scale. Okay, go up and down. All right, that sounds quite nice. It sounds quite melodic. Okay, so immediately we have a foundation of something that we can work with. We know it's going to sound all right because we've literally used what the other person is playing and we're going to create something with it. So the next question is, what do we do with that, with these things? Okay, because appreciate that quite often in these sessions I'll say, oh, you can just jam along and use this scale, but I kind of can quite often take for granted the idea of how do you even make a melody, because maybe you just end up going up and down the scale, or maybe you just don't really know what you're hanging on to. And there's many answers to this. However, I think the best one is what we were talking about earlier, where you follow the chords and what the chords are telling you to do. Okay, now we talked about that G chord, okay, where it wants to conclude with that C. So you don't need to know where the note of C is, but when you try and make some phrases, using those notes, when you get to that last chord, maybe try and work with the chords and the journey that it's going on and finish the phrase in some way at that point as well. That kind of idea. So where the notes are rhythmically following the chords, if you like, in the way that they conclude at the end of the phrase. I'll play the chords around and give you a little bit of an opportunity just to try and create some melodies over the top of that. And then we'll talk about it again. Okay, maybe I'll leave that up for you actually as well. Okay, so I'll just play the chords around a bunch of times and see if you can use those few notes. And if you're an advanced player here and you're really wanting to get up and use all those scales, you know, stop yourself from doing that and just try and crunch down to just using those few notes and just try and dial in to what the sort of journey these chords are doing. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Wonderful. Okay, so hopefully when you're doing that, you notice that you don't always have to finish on the note of C, which is this note here, by the way. There's many notes that you can finish on, but if you're sort of emphasizing that then it seems to just work. It works better than the not following the way that the chords work in that way. And that's kind of, I think, a nice fundamental takeaway of playing with other people. It might seem slightly obvious, but the idea is that you're sort of blending with what is going on as much as possible. And usually that's based around the sort of movement of the chords. So you've really got to tap into that. Now that was a really nice simple way of doing it, because you don't need any theory there at all. You've just gone, there's the chords, and I'm going to just take those notes and use them in my own way. Now that could relate to any manner of complicated chord sequences, okay? There could be loads of chords going on, there could be bar chords. You can just sort of take some bits from it and make it your own. Now, next little level we're going to look at is using a bit of theory, okay? But ultimately, it's exactly the same principle as what we just did. Okay, what we just did is we essentially took all the notes from the key. All right, the key, if you like, is kind of the same as the scale as well. It's the bunch of notes that are used to make everything. Okay, now to play in key or in tune or together with someone, you need to use those same notes. If you're using completely opposing notes, it's going to sound weird. All right, so really, in all this more theory heavy stuff, all we're doing is exactly the same as we just did, where we take the chords that the other person is playing and just make them our own. So looking at a theory way, there's several different little shortcuts, all right, that I'm going to show you. The first one is a little bit more familiar to these sessions, I suppose, which is where we look at a minor or major or a minor scale, okay? First up, we have a little major scale shape here, and then over here we have a minor scale shape written up as well, okay? Feel free to just work through those if you don't know them. Now, this poses a really interesting question, and one that many of us might take for granted, which is, how do you actually know what scale to use? How do you even know what key you are in, okay? Now, it's actually a relatively tricky thing to answer, because you need your own sort of system for working that out. All right, that might sound slightly ridiculous, but it's very, very true. And really, you're going to need to sort of blag your way through it a little bit. Okay, now a fantastic rule to use is that the first chord dictates the key. All right, that if you use that rule, that's probably going to work 95% of the time. It's not always going to be the case, but it's a pretty safe bet. And you've got these things either side of your head. So if you try it and it sounds like it's wrong, don't panic. It's probably just that, 5% of the time that we didn't start in the key, all right? And if that's the case, you could always go back to using the notes from the chords that we were looking at earlier. So in this case, we started with a C major. So we're going to take a guess at the fact that it's in the key of C major. Now, in that case, we're going to use a major scale shape, which I have written out for you over here, and many of you know it very, very well already. We're going to go through it again anyway. So it's a shape, it's a movable shape. What I mean by that is that once you've learned to play this, you can just start on a different root note. We're starting on the root note of C, which is on the 8th fret on the E string. We then go up to the E string 10th fret with our little finger. Please always start with your second finger, okay? It will just help you out no end. Little finger, and then up to A string 7, 8, 10, and 7, 9, 10 on D. Okay, now that is our major scale shape. Now if I started the chord sequence on a G, for example, then maybe we would start on the note of G with the G major scale. So we'd put our second finger, 3rd fret E string, and play that exact same shape. Okay, there's a million and one different ways to play that scale shape, but that can give you an instant sort of access to what's going on. Now, what happens if we start on a minor chord? Well, if we start on a minor chord, we use a minor shape, and I've written a nice little minor shape here for you. Now, in this case, I've written starting on the note of A. We're going to use the A minor because confusingly, A minor is exactly the same as C major. Okay, so that minor shape starts with our first finger, and we're starting on A this time, okay, which is the 5th fret on the E string. And then we go 5, 7, 8 on E, 5, 7, 8 on A, and 5, 7 on D. Cool. Now again, it's a movable shape. So if I started a chord sequence on something weird like G sharp minor, which would cause unknown panic amongst people. But actually, what you could do is go, well, I'm going to find the note of G sharp, which happens to be on the 4th fret on the E string, and I'm going to just play my minor shape. Fantastic. Cool. Okay. So what happens then? You've got these notes. What do you do with them? Well, you do exactly the same as what we did with the notes from the chords. All right. You try and form a melody by listening to what the chords are telling you to do. Okay. Responding to the voice of it. You're not thinking in notes or anything, but you're just responding to what they're saying. Now, we'll just have another little jam through again. For those who are more advanced, now is a fantastic time to start joining up your scales a little bit, because in a moment or two, we're going to move to adding some nice little chord voicings in here. Okay, one wonderful place to start by joining up those scales is by simply joining up the C major with the A minor. Okay, because those are two exactly same scales. All right, so see if you can find some nice little pathways. All right, and that will be nice and exciting for you. However, if you're more of a beginner or intermediate guitarist, then I would suggest taking the C major scale, which is the first scale written there for you, and just try and improvise with that. And just jam, basically, responding to those chords. Okay, I'll leave the tab up so that you can look at those scales. I'll highlight the C major for you just to avoid any confusion. Yeah, and let's have another couple of minutes of playing that round. So 1, 2, 3. fantastic. Okay, so moving down then, we've now got some pentatonic shapes, all right? So this is another nice little way to tap into jamming with people, all right? We've talked about major or minor scales. We've talked about how we can sort of guess the key by that first chord. That's quite more often than not going to work out nicely for you. You can then apply the relevant major or minor scale. And pentatonic scales work in exactly the same way. However, they've had some notes taken out of them. So quite often that means they become a safer bet to use actually. All right, because there's less notes to clash really. So quite often this can be a good first port of call to work with. Now again, it's exactly the same principle. The note that we start on is the root note. So in this first scale that I've got written for you, no, I'm highlighting something completely wrong, sorry. Okay, this first scale that I've got written for you is the C major pentatonic, all right? You'll notice that it's going to be very, very similar to our A minor pentatonic that we're going to play in a minute. We start on our little finger, and that little finger is our root note, so it's C in this case, all right? So the one little bit of theory, I guess, that we do need to access all of this is actually to know our notes on the E string. So that is something worth learning, by the way. So our little finger on the 8th fret there, and then we carry on to the A string 5-7, D string 5-7, G string 5-7, B string 5-8, and E string 5-8. Okay, and that is the C major pentatonic. So if we're in our jam session again, someone's playing these chords, you know it starts on C, so we're going to take a guess that it's in the key of C major, and maybe we don't want to use the C major scale, so instead we're going to use the C major pentatonic. So we go up, find where C is, it's the 8th fret with our little finger, and play our shape, and then we listen to the chords, listen to the journey that they're taking us on, and then we try and fit in with that. Now, the next shape along here is the minor pentatonic, and it is just one note different. It starts on the 5th fret with our first finger, which is the A there. Okay, so if I was playing something starting with an A minor chord, maybe we could use the A minor shape that we looked at earlier, or we could use the A minor pentatonic that's written here. Listen to the chords, listen to the journey that they're taking you on, and then try and respond in that way, to try and interact. Wonderful. Okay, one last little jam before we get a little bit more heavy, I think, a little bit more, not musically, in a sort of a philosophical way. I don't know if we can really make that. It just doesn't work, does it? It doesn't work heavy. All right, here we go then. One last little jam before we get a bit deeper. So 1, 2, 3. Excellent. Fantastic. Okay. Right. Okay, so before we start moving on to the extra little shapes, let's have a little bit of a recap of what we've talked about. So we're trying to look at ways of just playing with people. Okay, now there's 1,000,001 different situations, so I'm trying to sort of blend this one example situation to fit all. And it's the idea that someone's playing some chords and you're going to play along to that. Now, of course, you've always actually got the option of just copying someone completely and utterly. But usually we want to add something or support in some way. So we're looking at ways to do that. We started off looking at a way of not thinking with theory at all. And that actually can be really handy even if you do know bits of theory, because you might end up in a situation where that person is playing something you've just got no idea what it is. You've got no clue and it's really wrecking your head. And maybe your confidence is feeling far too shot to go, excuse me, what is that you're playing? So maybe it's a bit easier just to go, right, that chord, right, kind of looks like that, all right? And then I'm going to take those notes and I'm going to just work with those, all right? That is a fail-safe thing to do. And actually, in some ways, it's quite a creative thing to do as well. So we've looked at that. Then we've also looked at working out what key it is by going, first chord, let's take a bet on that first chord. It's a safe bet, it's a good bet. And then we're going to match up a scale with that. And then we're going to create melodies around it and on top. Now, when we're talking about creating melodies, I've constantly gone back to this idea of the journey of the chord, all right? And the chords telling you what to do. They're being like a little voice in your head going, oi, go to the sea, or these kind of little chordal phrases that are almost like melodic. They're always there. They're always telling us what to do. Now, some of you are probably thinking, what about melody, Chris? What about a melody in a song? Well, the fantastic thing is that actually the melody that is being played, unless it's some kind of weird, just completely detached from the chord sequence, the melody that you'll be hearing in a song will be doing exactly what I'm asking you to do here. It will be following and responding to the journey that the chords are going on. So whatever those chords are doing, they're either telling the melody what to do, or in fact, they're mirroring what the melody does. So when you're jamming, obviously you want to listen to a melody and what's going on there. But if you listen to that chord sequence again, that is kind of, I don't know, the secret code of what's happening in the song. So it's a great place to always go back to. Now, it's cool to talk about responding to chords and, thinking rhythmically or whatever, or melodically, but actually we can go a little bit more abstract than that. And we don't always just have to be a chord player, a finger picker, or a melody player. It doesn't have to be like that. And some of the most beautiful accompaniments and jams that I've ever heard, and guitarists that I love, and in fact we've looked at here, quite often do something that isn't melody or isn't rhythm or isn't finger picking. It's somewhere in between, but they're still using the same principles. A great little way to work with that is these sort of double stops that we've looked at previously, but we'll look at 1,000,000 times again over the coming weeks anyway. And we've just got a nice little bunch of shapes written out here for you, all right? And actually, they are little voicings of the chord. Okay, now if you're a pick player, you could use a hybrid thing where you play with your ring finger on the B string if you wanted to, or you could just mute the strings and just play the strings that you want to come out. Or I just use thumb and middle finger. You might want to use a ring finger as well, because playing a little E string here, in this instance anyway, is going to sound particularly beautiful. Now this is for the more advanced players, all right, that are hungry to do something a little more technical. However, even if you're a beginner, it's a nice little shape to learn. Great. Okay, so as you guys just play through that and get familiar with that, I'm going to talk about it a bit. Now, These little double stops and shapes can be found in absolutely any key. The reality is they just take time to learn, all right? And you are going to come across some keys and you're not going to know so much stuff in those keys, all right? So this isn't quite so accessible as all the other sort of jamming ideas that we've looked at here to shift between keys. However, probably a lot of the songs that you're going to end up playing with people are going to be in C major or A minor. So these shapes that you learn here are going to hold you in good stead anyway. So they're well worth learning. So what we hear when we play them, oh, not that one. There we go. We hear kind of chords, but we kind of hear a scale as well, because it is literally somewhere in between the two. And what it means is that we can, when we jam, we can respond to the journey that the chords are going on. Okay, so we can think like we did melodically again, but also we can add some more harmony, some more detail, and some more sort of texture to what's going on. All right, we can start putting in little picking patterns as well, which I'm going to talk about with the E string in a second, and just add more to what's happening. All right, because as I said, we don't always just have to be chords, bass or melody. We can be somewhere in between, particularly if you're playing maybe just with one other guitarist. It's just really nice to support in many different levels, all right? So thinking what we'd term as like harmonically and texturally. Texturally is probably the nicest word because it's the most abstract, where you're just putting ideas and things in there, but you're always listening to those chords so that you're working with it and working together. Okay, so I'm just going to play through those to make sure everyone's got them. First fret B string, second fret D string, up to the 2 3s on D and B, 2 5s on D and B. Up to you what fingers you use, but when I get to these parallel shapes, I tend to use 3 and 4, and when I've got the diagonal one, I use 2 and 1. Okay, even if you just learn those first 3, when we have a little jam in a minute, you'll be able to make some beautiful sounds just with those anyway. Okay, and then we go up to our next sort of bunch of diagonal shapes where we go 6 and 7. So I'm using fingers 2 and 1, and then this time we do another diagonal shape where we're on 9 and 8. Then third and little come down to play the 2 10s, up to the 2 12s, and then 13 and 14. Okay, now we can also use the open D and the open B in this instance. Okay, so here's a couple of little exercises to use before we have a little jam with this. Try, excuse me, first off, try using those open strings in between each one. Okay, and then try using in a little phrase. So okay, so using the open phrases at the beginning, and then try picking. All right, working with 2s is nice and simple, so going between thumb and second. You can just have a nice consistent rhythm that would fit with the chords, because remember, we're always listening to those chords and the journey that they're on. So in this example, you could even pick out the rhythm. kind of works, right? Then the other thing we can do is we can think about using the E string with our ring finger. We can think again in twos if we want, or we can think in threes. It's up to you, but it's just a nice little pedal note to throw in there to bring, again, a bit of texture, because we don't always have to think just melody, rhythm, bass, and all that kind of stuff. Cool. So yeah, they're really, really nice shapes to use and to play around with. Yeah, let's finish off with a nice little jam, and you guys can hopefully use whatever it is you want to do. Maybe you just want to play those chords, actually. They just kind of speak to you, don't they? And they just immediately, there's something probably inside going, I think I've got lyrics. I think I want to sing something. And you can, because no one can hear you, so feel free to break out into song. I'll remember that you guys can all hear me though, so I won't do that, don't worry. Yeah, and just use whatever it is that that you would like to there, okay? And remember that there really is no rights and wrongs in jamming and playing with other people. All right, there's a hell of a lot of confidence that goes into this stuff. There's a hell of a lot of language barriers, all right? In fact, I won't go too over emotional here, but there's a lot of musicians and of professional and amateur level who will use language to actually make playing kind of exclusive and hard. Sometimes that can be from another player's perspective of feeling underconfident, and will suddenly start talking about chords and keys in a way of like, oh God, I got to see, like I know what I'm talking about, all right? Or maybe some kind of ego thing as well, all right? There's always a language barrier, but ultimately the fundamental point is the same, or you're just trying to work with what you're hearing. So if you can dial into those chords and just kind of connect with it in some way, just like we've done with this sequence that I know every single one of you has. I really have, because I can see, and I can see the difference between what and doing it. And you can dial in that same way. It's very hard to articulate that, but you can dial in that same way, and you can use either completely just taking what you can see and making that your own, where we took those notes from the chords again. And that applies in any circumstance. And remember, even for the more advanced players, that really works well when you've got no idea what someone is doing, all right? And maybe you can't ask, and you're just like, okay, well, I'm just going to look at those notes and I'm going to steal a bunch of them, and that's going to work. Honestly, if you take one thing, take that, because it really will work. Or alternatively, you can guess the key with that first chord, and you can apply the relevant scale shape that we've looked at there. And then finally, we've got these lovely little harmonies, which maybe we'll talk in more detail about in the next session. However, the same idea applies. You could hear there, you can hear the chord sequence, even though the chord sequence isn't there. I've got it playing in my head. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same idea. You're just responding to that journey of the chords. I'm going to shut up now because I'm starting to waffle, and I'm going to play those chords around, and you guys can do whatever you want and just enjoy playing, because that's the whole point of this. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody. I hope you enjoyed that session. I think next session we'll get stuck into more of the kind of playing with people stuff. So if you've got any thing or angle that you would like me to cover, then just drop me a little message. However complex or simplistic, even if you felt sort of previously almost embarrassed to ask it, then please put it in. I'll be more than happy to look at it. I think I'll start recording.